My name is Samantha Pierce, and I'm 28 years old. Last Saturday, I drove 4 hours from Seattle to my parents' home in Ashland, Oregon, ready to finalize plans for my dad's 62nd birthday, a heritage trip I had spent the last 3 years preparing. But when I stepped through the front door, my mother's words froze me in place. We all voted. You're not part of this anymore. She didn't even blink as she said it. My older sister Vanessa stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes cold. Behind them, I spotted party decorations strewn across the kitchen island, champagne glasses, calligraphy menus, and a banner that read, Franklin's Grand Gala, a retirement celebration for the ages. Except, I hadn't been invited to plan it. I hadn't even known it existed. I felt the air leave my lungs. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there, fingers tightening around the leather strap of my bag. This couldn't be real. They had to be joking. But the smirk on Vanessa's face made it clear. This was no joke. What made it even worse was the fact that just 6 months ago, at Thanksgiving dinner, my dad had teared up when I told him about the trip I was planning. A journey to Charlestown, Massachusetts, where his great-grandfather fought during the Revolutionary War. We had talked about visiting old battlegrounds, the local archives, and even meeting distant relatives who still lived in the area. His eyes had lit up. It was the most alive I'd seen him since his retirement announcement. I'd saved $7,000 to make it happen. 3 years of budgeting, canceled vacations, skipping out on fancy coffees, new shoes, even dating apps because I was pouring everything into giving my father the one experience he'd always dreamed of. And now? I wasn't even allowed at the party. Let me back up for a second. I've always been what people politely call the quiet child, while Vanessa was the overachiever, CEO of a sleek AI startup, always dressed in neutrals, the one who knew how to work a room. I was the sensitive one, a licensed trauma therapist who believed more in listening than performing. Dad understood that about me. Mom never did. Growing up, I used to dread dinner conversations. If I offered an idea or tried to share something I was excited about, Mom would smile that tight, polite smile that never reached her eyes, then pivot back to Vanessa. Always Vanessa, the golden daughter, the one who could do no wrong. But Dad was different. He coached my middle school debate team. He helped me make a diorama of the Boston Tea Party for a fifth-grade history fair, even stayed up with me till 2 a.m. when I cried over it collapsing the night before. When I got my therapist license, he framed the certificate and placed it right next to his collection of antique war medals. I was his daughter, his person. So when he started talking more and more about unfinished business and how he wished he had gone to see where his ancestors had lived and fought, I saw my opportunity. A way to give back, to reconnect with him now that his health was starting to slip and his career was behind him. I started planning in secret at first, calling historical sites, researching family lineage, even connecting with a Pierce descendant society in Boston that had preserved our great-great-grandfather's journals. I was going to surprise him with it, until I realized he didn't need the surprise. He needed something to look forward to. So I told him, and I watched his whole face soften, the lines around his eyes crinkle like they used to. He clutched my hands and whispered, Samantha, that would mean more to me than anything. But apparently it didn't mean anything to the rest of my family. Standing in my parents' kitchen with my mother's words echoing in my ears, you're not part of this anymore, I realized this wasn't just a disagreement over a party. This was a verdict, a deliberate erasure, and they were proud of it. What none of them knew was how much I was willing to fight for the truth. Because what happened next would unravel every lie they'd built around what family really means. I didn't leave right away. I stood there in the kitchen, the stale scent of lemon-scented cleaner clinging to the air, watching my mother pour sparkling water into champagne flutes like nothing had happened. Vanessa, I said finally, my voice tight. Can we talk? Alone? She didn't even glance at me. There's nothing to talk about. There's everything to talk about. She sighed dramatically, then followed me to the hallway, arms still crossed. The second the kitchen door clicked behind us, I exploded. You knew how much this trip meant to Dad. Why are you letting them do this? Her expression was flat. Because it's not about you, Sam. You're always making everything about you. You don't get to hijack Dad's retirement. I blinked. Hijack? I've been planning this for 3 years. With my own money. She shrugged. It's excessive, over the top. A local party is more practical. I stepped closer. You mean more controllable? She didn't deny it. That told me everything. Vanessa had always needed to control the narrative. From childhood birthdays to family photos, she curated the image. The perfect daughter, the brilliant CEO, the center of every room. And I was the blurry extra in the background. Even when I earned my degree and opened a thriving private practice in trauma therapy, all Mom said was, Vanessa just closed another funding round. Isn't that exciting? No, I'd never been enough. Not loud enough, not polished enough, not successful enough. At least not in a way that sparkled in photographs or won her bragging rights at charity lunches. But Dad saw me. Dad always saw me. Growing up, he was the one who sat on the floor with me building models of ancient cities when I went through a historical phase. The one who drove 4 hours to my college apartment at 2 a.m. when I had a panic attack during finals. The one who brought peanut butter cookies to my office every Friday after he retired, just to chat and make sure I was taking care of myself. So when he started saying things like, I always wanted to see where the Pierces came from, I listened. Charlestown, Massachusetts wasn't just some cute vacation idea. It was a homecoming. The town where his great-grandfather, Private Abraham Pierce, had fought in the Battle of Bunker Hill, where he'd returned after the war to start a family, open a bookstore, and pen letters to future generations that had survived in the local archives. I had every detail planned: a private walking tour of historic battlegrounds, a reservation at a restored colonial inn where our ancestors had once dined, a guided tour of the archive where my great-great-grandfather's handwritten letters waited to be read, dinner with living relatives I'd discovered through months of ancestry research. And now it was being reduced to, it's just too much travel for someone his age. Funny how he never said that himself. Funny how he had lit up when I told him we'd be standing where Abraham Pierce once stood. I didn't confront Mom that day. Not fully. Because I was afraid of what I'd say, or what I'd do, if she smirked the way she always did when she thought she'd won. Instead, I left. I drove back to Seattle in a daze. I didn't even turn on music. Just watched the lines on the highway blur past, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my stomach churning with the weight of unspoken fury. When I got home, I stood in my apartment surrounded by printed itineraries, historic maps, and a custom gift box I'd ordered for Dad, filled with letters I'd written him for each day of the trip. 7 envelopes, one for each day. Each letter began with, "Here's what I never got to tell you." Now, I didn't know if he'd read a single one. I collapsed onto the couch and let the tears come. Loud, angry sobs. I cried for the money, the effort, the betrayal, but mostly I cried for the quiet girl who had finally tried to shine and got stomped out. Then something shifted. A numb sort of clarity settled over me. If they didn't want me at the party, fine. But I'd make sure Dad knew what they were hiding from him. Because no matter what Vanessa said, this wasn't about me making things about myself. This was about love. And I was done letting them bury mine. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. I called my dad 3 times. Each time it rang to voicemail. I texted him. Hey, just checking in. Want to talk about Charlestown? No reply. I tried again the next morning. Nothing. By the 3rd day, the silence wasn't just painful. It was terrifying. This wasn't like him. Dad always answered. Always. My heart began to race with something worse than anger. Fear. What if they'd convinced him I didn't care? What if my mother had told him I'd dropped the plans and didn't want to be involved in his birthday anymore? The idea wrapped its hands around my throat. So I called Dylan, Vanessa's husband. He picked up after 3 rings, his voice cautious. Sam? Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been trying to reach Dad. He's not responding. A long pause, then. He's been kind of off the last few days. My heart sank. What does that mean? I don't know. He's just quiet. Vanessa said he's been distracted, not really engaging. I took a breath. Did anyone tell him about the Charlestown trip? Another pause. Too long. Dylan? I. I'm not sure. I thought you did. His voice cracked just slightly. And suddenly I knew. They hadn't told him. They'd never told him. My mother, my sister, they'd made a choice. To erase me. To erase everything I had planned. And now Dad was sitting in that house, probably wondering why I'd gone silent. Why I hadn't said a word about the one trip we'd talked about for over half a year. They hadn't just shut me out. They'd lied to him. I hung up without another word and stared at the window of my apartment, heart pounding in my ears. I needed to talk to him. In person. I needed to see his face when I told him everything. Every tour booked, every letter written, every intention shattered. The next morning, I drove to Ashland again. No call, no warning. I needed truth, not permission. As I turned onto the tree-lined street where I grew up, I noticed something strange. Cars. Dozens of them. Parked along the curb, crowding both sides of the normally quiet road. My stomach twisted. I parked half a block away and grabbed the bakery box I'd brought. Hazelnut croissants, Dad's favorite. A desperate, naive offering of peace. But as I approached the house, voices and laughter drifted out through the open windows. Inside, balloons floated across the ceiling. People held wine glasses. A large banner stretched across the living room wall. Happy 62nd, Franklin! I froze. The party was already happening. Without me. No one had told me. No one had invited me. I stood on the porch for a long moment, breathing like I had just been punched. Then I knocked. My cousin Mason opened the door. His grin faltered when he saw me. Samantha, I didn't know you were coming. Clearly, I said. He stepped aside. I walked in. The house looked like a magazine shoot. Gold streamers, catered food, a jazz trio tucked into the corner of the dining room. My aunts and uncles were here. Family friends, even distant relatives I hadn't seen since high school, but not Dad. I scanned the room, searching for his face. He wasn't here. Where's Dad? I asked aloud, loud enough for my voice to carry. Heads turned. My mother emerged from the kitchen, holding a tray of tiny shrimp cocktails. The look she gave me? Flat, annoyed. He stepped out for a bit, she said. But really, Samantha? You shouldn't have come. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not broke. Cracked. Like a fire starting deep in frozen wood. I'm his daughter, I said, each word sharp. And you lied to him. Gasps. Whispers. Someone dropped a wine glass in the dining room. I don't know what you're talking about, she said coolly. I stepped forward. You deleted my messages. You told him I didn't want to be involved. You sabotaged the entire trip. My sister appeared at the doorway, mouth tight. You don't know what you're saying. Vanessa cut in. No, I said, pulling a folder from my bag. Then what's this? I slapped the itinerary down on the counter. 7 days, historic tours, archive access, private genealogy sessions. This is the trip I planned for Dad. 3 years, $47,000 booked, paid for, hidden. My mother's face flushed. The room was silent. Where is he? I demanded. No one answered. Then I heard it. The soft chime of a cell phone. A familiar ringtone, coming from down the hall. I walked straight toward the study, ignoring the stunned faces behind me. And there, sitting quietly on the desk, was my father's phone. He hadn't taken it with him, which meant he never left. He was here, somewhere. And whatever they were hiding, whatever lies they'd told, I was about to uncover all of it. I turned around slowly, my father's phone still buzzing faintly in my hand. You said he stepped out, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But his phone is here. My mother didn't answer. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting toward the hallway. I felt it. That unmistakable energy in the air when a lie is seconds away from collapsing. So I followed it, not toward the front door, but down the hallway, to the guest room. The door was half shut, the curtains drawn. The hum of the central AC buzzed in the background. I knocked once, softly. No answer. I pushed the door open, and there he was. Dad, sitting in the corner armchair, dressed in a crisp navy blazer, the kind he only wore for formal events, with a single glass of scotch resting on the side table beside him. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from alcohol, from tears. Dad? I said, my voice catching in my throat. He looked up slowly, and when his eyes met mine, they filled again. Samantha? I crossed the room and knelt in front of him, holding out his phone. I've been trying to reach you. He took it like he barely recognized it. Then quietly he asked, "Why did you change your mind?" I froze. What? I thought, you didn't want to be here. That you had other plans. That the birthday didn't matter to you anymore. I stared at him. Then as slowly I sat down on the carpet, the folder of travel plans still clutched in my hand. Dad? I said gently. I didn't change my mind. I never left you out. They left me out. His brow furrowed. I handed him the itinerary, the letters, the family tree, the map I'd drawn with little stars over each site we were going to visit together. He flipped through them in silence, and then he shook his head, slowly at first, then with increasing intensity, and covered his face with one hand. "Oh my God," he whispered. She said you didn't want to be part of it anymore, that you'd backed out, that the trip was never real." I sat there, heart pounding, eyes burning. It was real, every part of it. He looked up, pain etched in every line of his face. I believed her. "I don't blame you," I said, voice tight. "She's good at that." Dad exhaled sharply. Then he stood. "Come with me." We walked out together, side by side, back into the living room where the party buzz had turned into a low, uncertain hum. The music had stopped. Guests were murmuring. My mother looked like she was about to drop the shrimp cocktail tray. He stepped into the center of the room and raised his hand. "Everyone," he said. Silence. He glanced at me, then back to the crowd. "We need to have a family conversation. Right now." For the next 15 minutes, Dad told everyone the truth. How he had been led to believe I'd abandoned him. How my trip, the one he'd been so excited about, had been buried, dismissed, and rewritten as selfishness. And how, just 10 minutes ago, he'd read the real plans with his own eyes. The faces in the room shifted, some confused, some mortified. Vanessa folded her arms and muttered, "This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," Dad snapped louder than I'd ever heard him speak. "You lied to me, Ma. You made me believe my daughter didn't care." Mom stepped forward, pale and visibly rattled. "I was trying to protect you," she said. "That trip would have exhausted you." "No," he said, voice steady. "You were trying to control me." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Franklin, be reasonable." He turned to her, and what he said next made the entire room hold its breath. "You don't get to define reasonable anymore. Not after what you did." For the first time in my life, I watched my father draw a line. Not gently, not with a smile, but with steel. He took my hand and said to the room, "I'm leaving, with Samantha. And we're going on that trip." Someone, I think it was my cousin Elise, clapped. My mother said nothing. Vanessa stared daggers into me. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because Dad chose me. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I finally belonged to the family I'd been fighting to keep. The ride back to Seattle felt completely different this time. Dad was in the passenger seat, dozing lightly as the Oregon hills rolled by. His hand still held the folder I'd given him. The itinerary, the letters, the maps. Every few minutes, he'd stir and whisper something like, "Can't believe this," or, "You did all this for me?" Like he was still trying to believe it was real. I didn't interrupt. I just kept driving, letting silence do the healing for once. When we arrived at my apartment late that night, he took off his shoes, sat on my couch like it was the most natural thing in the world, and said, "I'd like to be here for a few days, if that's all right." I nodded, trying not to cry. "It's more than all right." The next morning, my phone blew up. 17 missed calls, 38 texts. Mom, Vanessa, Dylan, a few from aunts and cousins who had been there at the party and were now apparently stunned into reality. I didn't respond. Neither did Dad. Instead, we made pancakes. Then we sat at my dining table and started building the new trip from scratch. The villa I had originally booked was now gone, but that didn't matter. Dad said he wanted it smaller, simpler. Just us, just truth. I don't need all the fluff, he said. Just give me the history, the stories, the walk-through time. So I booked a colonial-era inn near Bunker Hill, found us a guided walk with a local historian, and even contacted the archive where the Pierce family letters were stored. Within hours, we had a new plan. Not the one I had imagined, but maybe the one we both needed more. That afternoon, a message came through from Dylan. It was short. She's still spinning the story. Just thought you should know. Attached was a screenshot of Vanessa's Instagram, a photo from the party, captioned, "Despite drama, we pulled off the perfect night for Dad. So much love." I almost laughed. The performative perfection. The way she always needed to appear like the victim who rose above. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to correct her. Let her curate whatever reality she needed, because I had the truth. And the truth was sitting on my couch, humming along to some old Beatles song while researching Revolutionary War grave sites. Later that night, Dad and I sat on my balcony, wine glasses in hand, looking out at the Seattle skyline. He cleared his throat. I keep thinking about what she said. Who? I asked. Your mother. About protecting me. I waited. I think, in her own twisted way, she believed that she was doing what was best. But what she really wanted was control over me, over the narrative, over you. Yeah, I said softly. She never liked how close we were. She resented it, he said. I see that now. I took a long sip of wine. I still don't understand how she could lie like that. Not just about the trip, but about me, about how I felt. Dad turned toward me. Because if she acknowledged how deeply you care, then she'd have to acknowledge how deeply she doesn't. The words hit me like a chord I hadn't realized I'd been waiting to hear all my life. I blinked hard, looked away. The skyline blurred through saltwater eyes. He reached over, placed his hand gently on top of mine. You're my daughter, Samantha, and I'm proud of you. Not just because of this trip, but because you kept showing up, even when they tried to write you out. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't cry like I had so many nights before. I just breathed. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt peace. The old narrative, the one where I was always too much or not enough, was breaking apart. And in its place was something new. Not perfect, but real. A week later, Dad and I stood at Gate C-12 of SeaTac Airport, each of us with one carry-on suitcase and a copy of Revolutionary Roads, mapping the American fight for freedom tucked under our arms like matching souvenirs before the trip even began. It felt surreal. Not because we were finally boarding the flight I'd dreamt about for 3 years, but because we were doing it after the kind of emotional hurricane that could have broken us both. Instead, we were stronger. Quieter, maybe, but stronger. The flight to Boston was smooth, uneventful. I stared out the window for most of it, thinking about everything that had happened in the last 2 weeks. The party, the confrontation, the reveal, the silence. Vanessa hadn't called again. Neither had Mom. And honestly, I was fine with that. Dylan, though, he sent one more message the night before we flew out. I found something in the attic. I think it's yours. He attached a photo of a stack of manila envelopes. My handwriting on the front. My heart stopped. They were the letters. The ones I'd written for Dad, one for each day of the original trip, sealed, dated, and meant to be opened day by day. I had left them in a box in the hallway closet during a visit 2 months ago. And apparently, Mom had taken them. Not told Dad. Not given them back. She had hidden them like everything else. I felt rage, then sadness, then something else. something I hadn't let myself feel in weeks. Relief. Because at least now I had proof. Proof of what I tried to give him. We arrived in Charlestown on a gray morning, mist curling around the cobblestone streets like something out of a forgotten century. Our inn was small, colonial in style, all wood beams and brass handles. But Dad loved it. He joked that he felt like a time traveler, sipping black coffee by the fireplace as war-era hymns played softly through the speakers in the lobby. That first afternoon, we took a walking tour led by a local historian who wore a tri-cornered hat and knew every brick in the town by name. We stood at the foot of Bunker Hill, looking up at the obelisk that marked one of the bloodiest battles in early American history. "This is where it happened," Dad whispered, "where Abraham Pierce stood." I nodded, watching his eyes fill. "He wrote in a letter that he buried a silver ring under a sycamore tree the night before the fight," I said. Dad turned to me, surprised. "You found his letters?" I smiled. "I found everything." The next day, we visited the archives, a single room above the town hall, run by a woman named Deborah who wore wire-rimmed glasses and handled old paper like it was sacred scripture. She pulled out a folder from a locked cabinet. Inside were 9 original letters from Abraham Pierce, our ancestor. Dad read them out loud in a cracked voice, hands trembling. "Tell my children, and their children, that no cause is worth fighting for if it forgets the humanity of the man holding the musket." His voice broke. He pressed the pages to his chest. "I've waited my whole life for this," he whispered. That night, over dinner, he handed me a folded napkin. Inside was something small, silver. The ring, or rather, a replica of Abraham's ring, crafted by a local jeweler based on the description in his letters. "You earned this more than I ever could," Dad said. Tears spilled silently down my cheeks. I don't know what to say. "Then don't say anything," he said. "Just wear it. So you remember that even when people try to bury your story, the truth survives." I slid the cool metal onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Back at the inn, before we turned in for the night, Dad pulled a worn envelope from his bag, one of the letters Dylan had sent. He passed it to me. "Day 1, it read. "In case you need reminding of what this was always about." He opened it slowly, read it silently, then looked up at me. "Samantha," he said, "I can never repay you for this. Not just for the trip, but for not giving up on me." I nodded, too full to speak, because in that moment I realized something. This trip had never really been about history. It had always been about healing. The third day of our trip, we met the woman who changed everything. Her name was May Whitlock, 82 years old, sharp as a tack, and the great-granddaughter of Abraham Pierce's younger brother. We found her through a footnote in one of the archived letters and a few persistent calls to the local historical society. Her home sat on the edge of a low hill outside Charlestown, surrounded by rows of sycamores and a weather-beaten sign that read Pierce Homestead, Eston 1812. She welcomed us like long-lost relatives. No questions, no hesitation. Just a smile that reminded me of my grandmother's, and the scent of old paper and fresh lemon balm that hung in the air. "I've been waiting for someone to come looking," she said, pouring tea into delicate cups. "Most people don't care about the past anymore." "We care," Dad said softly. "More than you know." May led us to the study, and there in a dusty cedar box were dozens of letters, some written by Abraham, some by his children, and one addressed to Franklin Pierce, my father. My blood ran cold. "You're sure this is for him?" I asked. May nodded. "It arrived 15 years ago, from someone who said they were tracing the family line. I held on to it, just in case." Dad opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, typed, modern, dated March 2008. "Dear Franklin, if this reaches you, then the research I began didn't die with me. My name is Julian Pierce, and I believe we are related through Abraham's youngest son, Thomas. I don't have children, and I've spent my life researching the bloodline. I want someone to continue it, to know the truth of who we are. Not the parts in textbooks, but the pieces hidden in stories and soil. Dad read the rest in silence, then passed it to me. There are records buried on this land, documents that prove Abraham hid fugitive slaves during the war, that he defied his own regiment to protect civilians, that he chose conscience over country. That's the legacy worth carrying. If you're reading this, it's yours now. My heart hammered in my chest. Abraham wasn't just a soldier. He was a rescuer, a protector, a rebel against injustice. And his descendant, my father, had spent his entire life teaching history without ever knowing that truth. Dad put the letter down, his voice breaking. I taught thousands of students, and I never knew this. You do now, I said. We stayed at May's house for hours, combing through stories, records, letters so old their ink looked like shadows. We took photos, recorded her oral history, and promised to fund digitization efforts. That night, back at the inn, Dad said something I'll never forget. This trip was supposed to be about retirement, closure, but instead, it opened everything. I nodded. History's funny like that, I said. It doesn't heal you, but it shows you what is worth fighting for. The next morning, before we flew home, Dad made a call. To my mother. He put her on speaker. Her voice was tight, composed. I didn't expect to hear from you. You didn't expect I'd find the truth either, he replied. She was silent. I'm not calling to argue, he said. I'm calling to tell you that I'm not moving back in. Not yet. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. I need space to process, to think. I don't know what our future looks like, but I do know one thing. He looked at me as he said it. I won't let your fear rewrite my daughter out of my story again. He hung up before she could respond. On the flight home, I pulled out one final letter, the one I had written for Dad's birthday morning. I hesitated, then handed it to him. He opened it slowly, read it, smiled, then said quietly, "Let's write the next chapter together." And I knew, no matter how broken the past had been, our future would be something entirely different. Coming home felt different. Not because Seattle had changed, but because I had. The apartment looked smaller, quieter, but it wasn't empty this time. Dad stayed in the spare room for a while, not because he needed a place to crash, but because it gave us space to rebuild. Every morning, we drank coffee on my balcony and talked about real things. His childhood, my memories, what forgiveness should look like when it isn't owed, but offered anyway. Vanessa didn't reach out again. Dylan did. He asked to meet for lunch alone. We sat at a cafe halfway between my office and the place where he used to work, before he left Vanessa's company. He told me he'd resigned, said he couldn't keep pretending everything was okay after what she and my mother had done. She's rewriting everything, he said. Her version is clean, polished, no betrayal, just a sister who overreacted. I stirred my tea slowly. And you? I want to start telling the truth, he said, even if it makes everything harder. There was a time I would have doubted him, but that time had passed, so I nodded. You start by telling Dad, I said. Not me. Mom did call eventually. It was late, almost midnight, and her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I've started seeing someone, she said, a therapist. I didn't respond. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know I hurt you. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. I sat there in silence, waiting to feel something. Anger, satisfaction, sadness. But instead, all I felt was relief, because trying after all this time was more than I ever thought she'd do. I appreciate that, I said, but it's going to take time. She sniffled. I understand. Before she hung up, she said, I saw the photo. Of you and your father at the monument? He looked happy. He was, I said simply. We both were. And then, for once, she didn't ruin it with a comment. She just said, I'm glad. Dad eventually moved back into his condo. Not with Mom, but in the city, closer to me. He teaches guest lectures now at the university and is working on a book about Abraham Pierce. Not just the soldier, but the rescuer. We're co-authoring it together. Every Sunday he comes over. We cook something from the old New England recipe book May gave us. chowder, cider cake. Sometimes we just reheat leftovers and watch war documentaries. But it's ours. And it's honest. As for me, I reopened my practice with a new name, Pierce & Co., Therapy for the Generationally Bruised. And a small act of defiance, a big act of truth. 1 year later, on Dad's 63rd birthday, we hosted a dinner at a small colonial-style restaurant in Seattle. Just 6 of us. Dad, me, Dylan, a couple of friends, and May, who flew in just for the night, still sharp as ever. As we raised glasses to toast, Dad looked across the table and said, "Family is not who you share blood with. It's who will stand beside you when the narrative falls apart." Then he turned to me. "Thank you, Samantha, for rewriting ours." We clinked glasses, and for the first time in my life, the sound didn't echo with tension or pretense. It rang like a promise. Have you ever been erased from your own family's story, only to reclaim it piece by piece? If you have, know this. You are not alone, and your truth is worth fighting for. Thank you for listening to my journey. I hope it helps you start your own.